The alien empire of Valoria was known across many star systems for its order, beauty, and calm strength. At the center of it stood a vast crystal palace, shaped by ancient builders and glowing softly under twin suns. Inside that palace sat Queen Seralith, ruler of Valoria, wise, composed, and respected by allies and rivals alike. Beside her throne stood her human consort. To most of the court, he was an odd sight. He was taller than many of the alien nobles but slimmer than the royal guards. His clothing was simple, dark, and practical, with no jewels or symbols of rank. He did not speak unless spoken to. He did not seek attention. He did not act like someone who had married into power. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Why would a queen choose a human? He looks like a scholar, not a warrior. Perhaps he is only a political gesture. The human never reacted. His face remained calm, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he was always listening to something others could not hear. Queen Seralith noticed everything. She had chosen him herself, against the advice of many. The alliance with Earth had been important, but that was not the only reason. There had been something about the human when she first met him. A quiet steadiness, a gaze that did not flinch in the presence of power. Still, even she did not fully understand him. Not yet. On this day, the great hall was filled with tension. The air shimmered with soft light from floating orbs, but the mood was far from calm. Members of the royal council stood in a wide circle, their voices low but urgent. A disturbance had been detected at the outer borders of the empire. At first, it had seemed minor. A few lost signals. Trade routes growing silent. Patrol ships failing to report in. These things happened sometimes, even in peaceful times, but now the pattern was clear. Something was moving. Queen Seralith listened as a senior commander spoke. His voice carefully controlled. Our long-range sensors confirm unusual activity near the Kareth expanse, he said. The energy readings do not match any known fleet. Murmurs spread through the hall. The Kareth expanse is unstable, one counselor said. It could be a natural phenomenon. The commander shook his head. It is organized. Deliberate. Queen Seralith folded her hands calmly. How long before it reaches our space? The commander hesitated. If it continues at its current pace, weeks, perhaps less. Silence followed. The queen's gaze shifted briefly to her human consort. He had not moved. His eyes were focused on the projected star map, studying it with quiet intensity. She noticed something then. While others looked worried or confused, the human looked thoughtful, not afraid. The queen turned back to the council. Increase patrols. Strengthen communication lines. I want daily updates. The council bowed and began to disperse. As the hall emptied, only a few remained. Guards returned to their posts. The lights dimmed slightly, returning the chamber to its usual calm. Queen Seralith finally spoke to the human. You have been quiet, she said. He turned to her, meeting her eyes with respectful ease. There was much being said. I wished to listen first. You sensed something? She asked. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Whatever is coming, it is testing your borders before committing fully. The queen raised an eyebrow. You speak with confidence. The human inclined his head slightly. On my world, this pattern is familiar. She studied him more closely now. You have not spoken much of your past. He did not avoid the question. I did not think it important. Perhaps it is, she said gently. Before he could respond, a sharp chime echoed through the hall. One of the communication orbs flared bright red. A junior officer's voice broke through, strained but clear. Your Majesty, we have lost contact with Outpost Theta. That outpost was not near the border. It was deep within Valorian space. The queen rose from her throne at once. Details. No distress signal, no debris. It simply vanished from the network. The queen felt a cold weight settle in her chest. This was no longer a distant concern. Around her, advisors began speaking quickly, offering theories and suggestions. Some argued for immediate military action. Others urged caution. Through it all, the human remained silent. Queen Seralith turned to him again. What do you think? The room grew still. Several council members looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. They were not used to a human being, asked for guidance in matters of imperial security. The human did not rush his answer. Outpost Theta was well defended, he said calmly. If it vanished without a signal, then whatever did this wanted it that way. That suggests overwhelming force, a counselor said sharply. Or precision, the human replied. The Queen watched the exchange closely. Explain. He gestured toward the star map. If the goal was fear, they would have left survivors. If the goal was destruction, there would be debris. This was neither. The room was silent. It was observation, he continued. They wanted to see how you would respond. Queen Seralith felt a shiver run through her. You believe we are being studied? Yes, the human said. And tested. The counselors exchanged uneasy glances. And what would you do? The Queen asked softly. The human met her gaze. I would prepare quietly, strengthen unity, and avoid showing panic. Some counselors bristled at his tone, but the Queen felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. His words made sense. After the meeting ended, the Queen and her consort walked through a private corridor overlooking the palace gardens. Bioluminescent plants glowed softly below, reflecting in the tall windows. You speak as if you have faced this before, the Queen said. He nodded. Human history is full of moments when we believed we were safe, until we weren't. He nodded. Human history is full of moments when 42, and these KP8, and in 70, accorded. She stopped walking and turned to him. Why did you never tell me? Because you did not ask, he said simply. And because I did not wish to be valued only for what I can do in times of fear. I would be with. 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 The Queen studied his face. There was no pride there, no desire for recognition, only honesty. Before she could respond, another alert sounded. This one was quieter, but no less serious. A message appeared on the corridor display. Multiple systems reporting signal interference. Queen Seralith felt the weight of leadership press down on her once more. She straightened, her expression firm. The Empire will need every strength it has, she said. The human nodded. Then it is good that strength comes in many forms. She looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered for the first time just how much she truly knew about the man she had married. Far beyond the palace, in the dark between stars, something vast and patient continued to move, and somewhere within the glowing halls of Valoria, a quiet human waited not with fear, but with readiness. The days following the loss of Outpost Theta were filled with restless movement across the Valorian Empire. Patrol ships doubled their routes. Communication arrays were recalibrated again and again. Military councils met late into the artificial night, their voices tense and uncertain. Yet despite all the activity, no clear enemy appeared. No fleets crossed into Valorian space. No demands were made. No signals were sent. Only silence. Queen Seralith sat in the high observation chamber, watching streams of data scroll across a wide crystal display. Her expression remained calm, but inside her thoughts moved quickly. Silence, she had learned, could be more dangerous than open threats. Behind her stood her human consort, still and patient. He had become a quiet presence during these meetings. He rarely interrupted. He listened more than he spoke. But when he did speak, people paid attention now. His earlier assessment of Outpost Theta had proven unsettlingly accurate. More reports had come in. Small stations experiencing brief power losses. Navigation beacons drifting off alignment. Patrol crews reporting strange sensor echoes that vanished when approached. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but taken together, it formed a pattern. The Queen turned from the display. The Council is divided, she said. Some want to strike preemptively. Others believe we are imagining shadows. The human nodded slowly. Both reactions are common. She studied him. On Earth? Yes, he replied, especially when facing something unfamiliar. They walked together along the chamber's curved balcony. Below them, the capital city spread out in layered terraces of light and motion. Life continued as normal. But the Queen knew fear was beginning to spread beneath the surface. Merchants delayed shipments. Citizens lingered longer at home. Rumors moved faster than facts. I cannot allow panic, the Queen said. But I cannot ignore danger either. The human rested his hands lightly on the railing. Then, you must give people purpose. She looked at him. Purpose? Preparation without fear, he said. If people feel useful, they feel steady. Later that day, the Queen addressed the Empire. Her message was simple and calm. She spoke of routine security measures, of unity, of trust in Valoria's strength. She did not mention Outpost Theta by name. She did not speak of unknown enemies. The reaction was immediate. Trade resumed. Slowly. Citizens returned to public spaces. The sense of order held. The council, however, was less at ease. In a closed session, voices rose. We should mobilize the full fleet, one commander argued. We risk appearing weak and provoke something we do not understand. Another countered. Queen Seralith listened, then raised a hand. I will hear one more opinion, she said. All eyes turned toward the human. Some counselors stiffened, but none objected openly now. He stepped forward, posture relaxed but firm. Strength is not always movement, he said. Sometimes it is restraint. 2. A commander scoffed quietly. Easy to say when your world is not at risk. The human met his gaze without anger. Earth learned restraint the hard way. The Queen leaned forward slightly. Explain, he took a breath. When humans encounter uncertainty, we observe. We gather information. We test systems quietly. Not because we fear action, but because we value timing. He gestured toward the data display. Whatever is watching you is patient. If you rush forward, you reveal yourself. If you hold steady, you force them to show intent. The room fell silent. The Queen nodded once. We will hold. But we will prepare. Preparations began quietly. Defense networks were strengthened under the cover of routine maintenance. Civilian pilots were trained in emergency protocols. Medical stations stocked additional supplies without announcement. And always, the human consort moved calmly among them. He spoke with engineers, asking thoughtful questions. He walked with pilots, listening to their concerns. He visited training halls, observing without judgment. Many were surprised by him. They expected arrogance from a consort of the throne. Instead, they found patience. Trust began to grow. Then came the incident at Relay Station Virex. The station did not vanish. It sent a signal, a single burst of distorted data before cutting out. The Queen stood in the command chamber as technicians worked quickly to analyze it. What do we have? She asked. A partial image, a technician replied. And a structure. The image resolved slowly on the main display. It showed space bent strangely around a massive shape. Not a ship. Not a fleet. Something else. Something vast and deliberate. The room went quiet. The human stepped closer, eyes narrowing slightly. It's a probe, he said. A probe? The Queen asked. Yes, he replied. Not designed for battle. Designed for learning. A counselor's voice trembled. Learning what? How you respond, the human said. As if in answer, the display flickered again. Another message came through. This one was clear. Not words, but symbols. Mathematical, universal. A greeting. The Queen felt a chill. They know how to speak to us. They know how to test us, the human corrected gently. The council erupted in argument. This is first contact. This is a threat. We must answer. We must destroy it. The Queen raised her voice. Silence. She turned to her consort. What would humanity do? He considered the question carefully. Humanity would answer. But not as expected. The Queen folded her hands. Show me. Under his guidance, The response was crafted. Not a military signal. Not a diplomatic plea. A record. Valorian history. Art. Music. Cooperation between species. Stories of resilience and unity. And one final message. We are aware. We are calm. We are not alone. The signal was sent. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Then the probe moved. It did not retreat. It did not advance. It changed position, aligning directly with the capital world. The Queen felt tension ripple through the chamber. What does that mean? Someone whispered. The human spoke quietly. It means they are paying attention now. Days later, the first failure occurred. A defense satellite shut down without warning. Then another, not destroyed, disabled. The Empire's shield grid flickered. Panic threatened to rise again. Queen Seralith stood before her council, her voice steady. We will not fall apart. We. She looked to her consort. Is this the moment? He shook his head. Not yet. This is pressure, not attack. How can you be sure? A commander demanded. Because if they wanted you gone, the human said, you would already be gone. That truth settled heavily. The Queen watched her people struggle with fear and restraint, and she saw something else growing alongside it. Resolve and trust. Trust in her leadership, and, increasingly, trust in the quiet human who stood beside her. Late that night, the Queen found herself alone with him in the palace garden. The bioluminescent plants glowed softly around them. You carry certainty like armor, she said. Yet you never boast. He smiled faintly. Certainty comes from knowing your limits. And your strengths? She asked. He looked up at the stars. Humans are strongest when we stand together, and when we wait for the right moment. Far beyond Valoria, the probe adjusted its position once more. The test was not over. It was only entering its next phase. The first clear sign that patience alone would no longer be enough came without warning. It began as a quiet failure in the outer defense grid. Not a shutdown. Not a loss of power, just a delay. Commands took longer to respond. Sensors refreshed a heartbeat too late. To most systems, it was nothing serious. To the human consort, it was everything. He stood in the central command chamber beside Queen Seralith as technicians worked to correct the issue. His eyes moved across the data streams, his expression calm but focused. They are no longer just watching, he said quietly. The Queen turned to him at once. What have they changed? They are testing response time now, he replied. They want to know how fast you can think under pressure. As if his words had triggered something, a second alert sounded, then a third. Across the Empire, systems began to experience small, controlled disruptions. Navigation errors that corrected themselves. Communication delays that vanished after a few moments. Power fluctuations that never reached critical levels. It was precise. Too precise to be random. The council gathered quickly. Tension filled the chamber, thick and sharp. Voices rose as reports streamed in. They are weakening us bit by bit. This is the beginning of an attack. We should strike the probe now before it escalates. Queen Seralith raised her hand, and the room slowly quieted. She turned to her human consort. Is this still pressure? He nodded. Yes. But the pressure is increasing. A senior commander frowned. How can you be so sure they will not destroy us? The human looked at him calmly. Because they want something. And what is that? The commander demanded. The human did not answer at once. Instead, he walked toward the central display and brought up a new projection. It showed not ships, not weapons, but connections, trade routes, alliances, shared defense treaties. They want to know if you are worth the effort, he said. Not as a target, as a factor. The room fell silent. Queen Seralith studied the projection. You believe this is a test of our unity? Yes, he said. And our leadership. The Queen took a slow breath. Then we will not face it alone. Under her command, messages were sent across the Empire, not warnings, not orders, but invitations. Allied systems were asked to share data. Civilian networks were asked to assist with monitoring. Scientists, engineers, and strategists were brought together, not separated. It was not how most empires responded to danger. But it was how humans often did. The human consort became the quiet center of it all. He did not give loud commands. He asked questions. He listened to scientists explain alien physics. He asked engineers to describe their systems as if teaching a student. He spoke with diplomats about trust and shared risk. Slowly, a new structure formed. Not a single defense line, but many overlapping ones. When the next disruption came, the Empire responded faster. The probe adjusted. When the probe adjusted, the Empire adapted. Days passed like this. Pressure, response, adjustment. The Queen watched it all with growing awe. She had ruled for many cycles. She understood power, politics, and fear. But what she saw now was something different. This was not force meeting force. This was will meeting patience. Then came the moment everything changed. A wave of interference swept through the capital system. For the first time, civilian life was affected. Lights dimmed across the city. Transportation slowed. Communication lagged long enough for fear to take hold. In the command chamber, alarms rang steadily. "They're pushing harder," a technician said. Still controlled but broader. Queen Seralith stood tall, her voice calm. Status of the shield grid? Stable, but strained. She turned to her consort. "If this continues, people will panic." He nodded. "Then it is time to show them strength." "Military strength?" she asked. "Human strength," he replied. At his suggestion, the Queen made another broadcast. This time, she did not speak alone. The human stood beside her. Across the Empire, screens lit up. Citizens paused. Ships slowed. Even distant stations tuned in. "My people," Queen Seralith said, "we face a challenge that tests not our weapons, but our resolve." She gestured to the human. "This is my consort. Many of you know him as quiet, reserved. Some of you may have doubted his place beside the throne." The human inclined his head slightly. The Queen continued. "I ask you now to listen." The human stepped forward. "I come from a world that learned survival the hard way," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We learned that fear divides, but purpose unites." He paused, letting his words settle. "What challenges us now is not here to destroy," he continued. "It is here to decide. And we will show it who we are. Not through panic, but through unity." Behind him, the display changed. It showed thousands of systems syncing together. Civilian processors lending power. Scientific arrays sharing data. Defense networks coordinating without chaos. "This is our answer," he said simply. The broadcast ended. Across the Empire, something shifted. Fear did not vanish, but it steadied. The next probe action came swiftly. A focused surge targeted the Central Defense Coordination node. It was a direct challenge. Technicians shouted as systems strained. The shield grid flickered dangerously close to failure. Queen Seralith felt the weight of her crown like never before. "Can we hold?" she asked. The human closed his eyes briefly. Then, he opened them. "Yes," he said, "if you trust me." She did not hesitate. "You have my trust." Under his direction, a risky change was made. Instead of resisting the surge, the system opened pathways controlled. Deliberate channels that redirected the energy through redundant civilian and research networks. It was not something Vyloria had ever attempted, but it was something humanity had learned to do. The surge spread out, weakened, and dissolved harmlessly. The room went silent. Then cheers broke out. The probe reacted instantly. For the first time, it transmitted a full signal. Not symbols, not mathematics. A question: "Why do you endure?" The Queen looked to her consort, heart pounding. He stepped forward and responded without consulting the council. "Because we choose to." The probe paused. Then it changed. Its structure shifted, unfolding into a more complex form. Not aggressive. Not retreating. Communicating. The human exhaled slowly. "It's adapting its understanding." Queen Seralith felt a sudden clarity wash over her. This was not about survival alone. This was about standing as equals. As the probe began exchanging deeper data philosophy, cooperation models, shared defense concepts, the Queen watched her consort closely. In this moment of greatest danger, he was calm, focused, certain. She realized then what she had truly married. Not a symbol, not a diplomat, but a representative of a species shaped by endless trials, who had learned that true might was not domination, but persistence. Hours later, when the immediate crisis had passed, the queen and her consort stood alone in the quiet command chamber. "You knew this would happen," she said softly. He shook his head. "I hoped." She looked at him with new eyes. "You carry the strength of legends, and hide it behind humility." He smiled faintly. "Legends are just people who kept going." Far beyond Valoria, the probe adjusted its position again, not as a judge, but as a listener. The test had changed, and the queen now knew, without doubt, that the human beside her was far more than he appeared. He was the reason they still stood. It no longer disrupted systems. It no longer tested defenses. Instead, it observed quietly, exchanging controlled streams of data with the Vylorian network. Scholars, scientists, and diplomats worked together to interpret its responses. Across the empire, a strange calm settled. People still felt fear, but it was no longer sharp. It had become focused. Queen Seralith stood before the wide viewport of the palace command chamber, watching the distant stars. Behind her, the human consort waited in respectful silence, as he always had. "You have changed everything," she said at last. He did not answer right away. "I only helped your people see what they already were." She turned to face him. "No. You showed us how to stand when being measured by something far greater than ourselves." The probe sent another transmission. This time, it was not a question. It was a statement. "Your response demonstrates cohesion, restraint, and adaptability. You are not prey. You are not chaos." The chamber filled with quiet murmurs as the message spread through the empire. Queen Seralith stepped forward and replied personally. "Then speak. Why were we tested?" The probe paused, as it always did, processing more than words. "We are custodians of balance. Civilizations that expand beyond their worlds must be understood before they are allowed to influence the wider network." The queen felt the weight of those words. Aloud, she whispered. The human consort spoke calmly. "They are not conquerors," he said. "They are observers. Gatekeepers." The probe continued. "Most civilizations respond with fear or force. Few respond with unity. Fewer still adapt without collapse." A new stream of data followed records of other species. Some had failed these tests. Some had fractured under pressure. Some had vanished entirely. The queen's hands tightened slightly. "And us?" she asked. The reply came slowly. "You endure. You learn. You adapt together." Across Valoria, citizens watched the exchange live. Markets paused. Ships held position. Entire worlds listened in silence. Then the probe delivered its final message. "You may remain. You may grow. But remember, growth demands responsibility." With that, the probe began to change. Its structure folded inward, reducing its massive form into a smaller, stable configuration. Not retreating fully, but no longer imposing. The test was over. Cheers spread across the empire, not wild, not reckless, but deep and relieved. Queen Seralith closed her eyes briefly. They had passed. In the days that followed, the empire slowly returned to normal. Systems were repaired. Defense networks stabilized. Civilian life resumed fully, but something fundamental had changed. Trust in the throne had deepened. Trust in unity had strengthened. And trust in the human consort had transformed into something close to reverence. The queen watched as council members who once doubted him now sought his counsel freely. Military leaders listened carefully when he spoke. Scientists treated him not as an outsider, but as a bridge between ways of thinking. Yet he never claimed authority. He never demanded respect. He remained the same quiet presence beside the throne. One evening, as twin suns dipped below the horizon, Queen Seralith dismissed her attendants and walked with him through the palace gardens. The bioluminescent plants glowed softly, casting gentle light across their path. "You could have commanded them," she said. "After everything, they would have followed." He shook his head. "That was never my role." "And what is your role?" she asked. He stopped walking and looked at her. "To remind power, when to listen. She studied him for a long moment. When I agreed to marry a human, she said, I believed I was making a political decision, a symbol of alliance. And now? He asked. Now I realize I married a living answer to a question we didn't know we would be asked. He smiled faintly, but said nothing. Later, the Queen convened the full council for one final session on the matter. The wider network now knows us, she said. Not as a weak empire, not as an aggressive one, but as a stable presence. She turned to her consort. And they know humanity. One counselor bowed deeply. The humans stood when our systems faltered. He guided us without seizing control. Another added. He showed us strength without domination. Queen Saralith nodded. This council will formally recognize humanity as a strategic equal within the Empire. The chamber echoed with agreement. Across distant systems, allied species took notice. Messages arrived, curious, respectful, cautious. The story of the test spread quickly, and always, at the center of it, was the quiet human consort. Days later, Queen Saralith stood before the throne, gazing out over the great hall filled with representatives from many worlds. Her consort stood beside her. As calm as ever, she addressed them all. Legends are often misunderstood, she said. They are not born from loud victories, but from moments when fear is mastered. Her gaze rested briefly on the human. This empire did not survive because of superior weapons or grand displays. It survived because one among us understood patience, unity, and endurance. The hall was silent. He did not shout. He did not command. He stood. That night, as the palace quieted and the stars burned steadily above, Queen Saralith and her consort stood alone on the balcony overlooking the capital. Do humans tell stories about moments like this? She asked. He nodded. We do. And how do they end? She asked. He considered the stars for a moment, usually with the understanding that survival is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of responsibility. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Then walk that journey with me, she said. He met her gaze. Always. Far beyond Valoria, the probe settled into a distant orbit, no longer watching closely, but no longer ignoring them either. The Empire had been measured, the human had been revealed, and Queen Saralith knew, with absolute certainty, that she had not married a mere consort. She had married a legend, one whose greatest power was knowing when to stand quietly and when to rise.